So the key things that we're going to cover in this video have to do with these questions. What's a dashboard? How are they different really from a report? Because reporting's been around for a long time. One of the issues that you see with lots of dashboards is that they typically kind of are just designed to replace a previously printed report. And so the information that is in the dashboard might be the same information that was in the report. Sometimes it might not even be formatted differently. It's just a table of data that's kind of replicating the kinds of presentation that was in the report. And the other issue is that people who build dashboards often are not really focusing on who is that dashboard meant for and what are they supposed to accomplish. Often a dashboard seems to be a grab bag of different statistics that are thrown onto a screen, kind of trying to be something for everyone instead of focus on one particular cognitive problem. When we're building dashboards in this class, and hopefully that'll carry over to dashboards that you might make in your careers, each dashboard is going to be specifically focused on a particular person and for a particular goal that they are trying to accomplish by the use of the dashboard. Okay, we're going to look at a few of these different dashboard examples. Some of these are actually in the book, in the reading. Some were not. And I'd like you just to spend about a minute looking at each one and kind of, if you remember them from the reading, review why they're wrong. If you don't remember them from the reading, take a look at examples of how this might be, how these different dashboards may or not be living according to our quote-unquote principles of visualization. All right. So are these wrong or not wrong? So here's the first one. I'll let you pause the video if you need to. So, sorry for the quality of the image. This is the best that it looks, the best of the image that I could find. The key thing here is that there's a lot of space used by something like a 3D pie chart, right? 3D column and bar chart, and then a whole bunch of numbers that are provided. We're not really quite sure how these different panes of the dashboard work together, but the key thing here is that we're using a whole lot of space for very little information on the right side of the screen. When you start designing your dashboard, you're going to see that every pixel is precious, and we're going to look at some visualizations that are better than pie charts and column charts at presenting lots and lots of data in small amounts of space today. Let's look at the second one. I'll let you pause the video to take a look at it. Okay, 3, 2, 1. So there's a lot of issues with this dashboard, but let's look at. I'd like you to focus right now on the colors that are used. And not necessarily that there are colors that are right or wrong. We haven't covered anything about color yet. But one of the things that we've discussed before is that we will use things like size and placement and color to have meaning. And so I'd like you to look at this dashboard about the colors that are chosen in the different panes and tell me if the choices of color are helping you to describe or to understand and interpret the meaning. Hopefully, what you will find, pause if you don't want to hear it yet. Hopefully what you will find and notice is that this orange and blue that's used in the head count report is used over here, the same orange and blue. The same orange and blue is used in 4 different panes to mean 4 different things, okay? Down here we have head count by department actual, where orange means customer support and this blue means engineering. Where up here, this orange means target headcount versus actual headcount. Over here, it means Americas versus EMEA. And over here, it means voluntary versus involuntary. This is a key issue that we want to make sure that we do not run into in our dashboards. None of these visualizations might be wrong when used by in our world, that is wrong. Okay. But none of these visualizations by themselves would necessarily be wrong, but when you put them all together and those same colors have 4 different meanings, now we've crossed over that line from not wrong to wrong. Okay. So one of the key things we have to make sure that we understand from this discussion is that once we go from visualizations as being independent to visualizations as working together on a dashboard, we have to be far more careful about the choices we make on the individual dashboards, so that if a color is used on one visualization, it is carried through with the same meaning on another visualization. And when they are not the same meaning, we make sure that we contrast the color. There's some other issues with this dashboard. Let's look at that headcount pane in the top left. Is the target, are we doing well or poorly in this pane? We have a target of 11,520. We have an actual of 10,514. Do I know which one is, if we're doing well? I don't. Now hopefully the user of this dashboard knows that we're trying to do a downsizing exercise, and so actual being lower than target is good. Or we're not trying to do a downsizing exercise, and we're supposed to have 11,500 people working here, and we're 1,000 people short on getting as far as headcount to be able to perform what how our company is supposed to perform. So the next thing we're going to talk about on dashboards, just like on any other visualization, is that dashboards cannot simply be displays of information. They must be, well, I guess the right word is catalysts for action. When I see the pane on the dashboard, I have to know, do I have to do anything? And if so, where do I have to investigate the numbers more deeply to understand what it is that I have to do? So we have to know, is something good or bad? Now, this is pretty good. We're going to talk about why dials are a poor use of space later. But as far as dials go, this one's pretty good. One is that it actually has a target. So we have average revenue per employee. We can see that our target is here at about 180. Our current number is about 165. And we kind of have some red, yellow, and green indicator as far as how that performance is against some sort of a scale. This is good as far as if you're going to use a dial, make sure that you have this kind of things like contextual information, reference information built into the dial. But we're going to look at some other visualizations that are way more efficient as far as space usage that can give us at least this much information about what's going on. Let's look at one more. And I'm not going to give you time to look at this one. The problem with dashboards is that people have a whole lifetime of looking at dashboards of cars, and they somehow think that if I call something a dashboard, it should look like a car dashboard. And honestly, that's kind of the way they were originally designed, right? To kind of be just gauges. And you needed a whole lot of external knowledge to be able to interpret these gauges and understand what it was to do. Kind of like when you're driving a car, you know what the speed is, but the car doesn't know what the speed limit is, or at least they didn't used to know what the speed limit was where you were. But just as cars are getting smarter, we're getting smarter about how we build dashboards. This is just a dashboard that's taken that car dashboard view to the extreme. So let's get into what exactly a dashboard is. And this is the Gartner group definition of what a dashboard is. And I want to focus on a couple of key terms in this definition. So dashboards are reporting mechanisms, but they're not reports, right? Through certain metrics and KPIs, they are made available to all manners of users. So we used to call dashboards executive dashboards, thinking that only executives would need the kind of information on these dashboards. But really now, dashboards are designed for all manner of users. The idea here is that by displaying KPIs, against some sort of reference, right? So we're saying, here's what the indicator is, here's what the reference is, here's how we know how well we're doing. We're going to indicate progress. I don't like the idea of their definition of charts, dials, gauges, and traffic lights. We have better ways of doing that. But the key thing is that a dashboard is supposed to be contextual. It's supposed to indicate progress toward a particular target. So a a dashboard is not just simply supposed to show all of these metrics, and then you're supposed to go there and interpret how that is to target. We're supposed to show targets. And the more context that we put into a dashboard, the more we have to just think about designing different dashboards for each manner of user. Because each manner of user is going to approach a dashboard with a different goal in mind. And so for that reason, it's really difficult to design a dashboard that can be all things to all people. And in fact, we should not. We should be looking at what is the user approaching this dashboard to do? What defined targets are they interested in? What are the kinds of action they can take about those targets? And then how do we indicate progress in a way that lets them know when they have to take action? This is this is the hype curve for dashboards. Dashboards have really underperformed for a long time, but with the kinds of tools we have now, like Tableau, Gartner feels like we're actually into the area where we're getting that we kind of know how to use dashboards, and I agree with that. In 2000, when I was being asked to build dashboards for executives, we didn't know what we were doing. Honestly, the software couldn't support what people wanted. People really just kind of wanted reports online. And so there was a lot of promises made about dashboards, but now a lot of those promises are able to be fulfilled. So from your reading, what is a dashboard? A dashboard is a visual display of the most important information, and this is the key thing, needed to achieve one or more objectives, that it's been consolidated on a single computer screen so that it can be monitored at a glance. Now, I've highlighted a lot of these things. Well, I basically have highlighted the key phrases, but each of these things, if we tie it back to our principles of visualization, these things have emerged from our principles of visualization, and we'll kind of look at that in the next few slides. So dashboards are graphical. They communicate something. They should not simply be numbers or metrics. They should be metrics that mean something. And the only way something means something is what? Compared to what, right? So our dashboard design for our group project is not going to be, hey, look, here's what our data says. That's part of what the dashboard's going to be, but it's also going to communicate something about that data. It's going to tell us, is this good or bad? Are these numbers what we're looking for, or do we need to improve? Or are we doing amazingly well, right? They have to follow the principles of data visualization, and they're also bound by the rules of visual perception. They're also created for a purpose, and usually that purpose is just one purpose, okay? They're created for a particular audience, usually because different audiences will approach dashboards with different cognitive evaluations to perform and with different purposes. They are not limited to executives, and usually they're bringing disparate information sources together. It must be fit for purpose, okay? The right information for the right audience with the right design, and we'll kind of explore that a little bit today. So the first thing we want to talk about are the kinds of dashboards, the levels of dashboards. And it's kind of hard. Few has these three levels that he describes in the book: strategic, executive, analytical, and operational. There's not there's not some sort of an equation that I can give you that says that this is an operational dashboard versus an analytical dashboard, etc. But there will be certain characteristics that are more likely to apply to a strategic dashboard versus an operational dashboard. We'll talk about those things, and some of the dashboards fit in between these categories. But in general, the dashboard types have to do with the level of detail of the information and the complexity of the kinds of decisions that can be made based upon that information. So let's start at the top, the executive dashboard. It's a high-level summary of past and current performance against some sort of benchmark. It's typically not live data because the people who are going to be using these dashboards are not looking at this data minute by minute. They're looking at this at the end of the month. They're looking at this at the end of the quarter. They might be looking at it halfway through, right? So it's a relatively low use frequency, And the kinds of decision making that people are going to be doing using this dashboard is relatively unstructured, well, highly unstructured. And by that, what we mean is a structured decision is a decision where if X happens, I know I have to do either Y or Z, or if X happens and Y happens, then I have to do Z. At the strategic and executive level, that's not the kind of things that the kinds of decisions executives are paid to make, right? They're paid to look at a whole bunch of unstructured information coming from multiple sources and start to understand a series of decisions that have to be made because of that data that they see. The decision importance is much higher, right? And the impacts of that decision go on for significantly longer times, and they are big. They are big money decisions, right? This is the kind of decision that says we're not going to sell this product anymore, or we're going to design a new product and retire our old product. These are long-term, big money decisions that are being made, but it's not as if you put the information into a dashboard, you could program a computer to know what was the correct decision to make or the next step. An analytical dashboard is the next step down. It's instead of talking about how are we doing for the quarter or how is our business doing in general, what we're really looking at is who, what, when, and why. Who, what, where, when, and why did something happen, right? It's a lot more interactive. Rather than giving us a big picture, we're going to give ourselves a picture that we can slice and dice a lot of different ways. Still, relatively unstructured decision making, not highly unstructured decision making. There's still going to be a whole lot of, oh, X and Y happened, so therefore I need to do either A or B, depending upon some other information that's not on the dashboard. Again, medium decision importance, impacts, and horizons. This is month to month kinds of things, quarter to quarter kinds of decisions that might be being made by the use of an analytical dashboard. And then finally, we kind of have these real-time dashboards, which how are we doing right now, right? How many calls are in the call center right now, and is one particular queue overloaded? Do I need to shift a segment of my operators to another queue, right? The nice thing about an operational dashboard is if you make a mistake, if you look at that information, you make a decision and it doesn't make it better, you know right away, right? So the decision horizons are very short. It might be hourly even, where I'm reorganizing my call center, or even faster, reorganizing my call center for different levels of volume, etc. And so again, if I make a bad decision, the duration and the impact of that is going to be relatively short. So this is really a how are we doing right now? Analytical is how are we doing this quarter or this month? And the executive decision is, are we doing the right thing, right? And so each of these dashboards, it's kind of hard to say this one is analytical and this one is operational, but typically the shorter the time horizon, the more frequently the data updates and the kinds of decisions that have to be made based upon the information will kind of direct you as far as what kind of dashboard you might be trying to design, and the design will be different depending upon the different dashboards. So before you start on the dashboard, you have to know who your audience is and what the purpose is. It's going to drive what kind of dashboard you build. So it's for the CEO. He's going to look at it once a quarter, and this is what he needs to know from it. It's for a call center manager or a floor manager in a factory. This is what that person needs to know on an hour-by-hour basis. All right? So let's look through. So it's for a specific objective. We're going back to our definitions here. It fits on a single screen. This is the part that most students, especially those who have designed dashboards before, say, you can't fit it all on one screen. There's just too much information. And for that, I'll say, that's true. You can never put all the information you want to on a single screen. Well, not never, but it's hard to put all the information that you want to put on a screen. But remember, we're not trying to put all the information on a screen. We're trying to put all the information that tells you that you have to take action on the first screen. And then you can drill down into other levels to get more information about exactly what action you're going to take. All right? So there's no scrolling and no pages. Think back to our principles of human perception discussion. Why? Why is that important? It's important because of working memory limitations. We do not want our users to have to be placing something in their brain, going to another page, getting something from that page, and then having to go back and do computations against it on the first page. So they should fit entirely on one screen. They are at a glance. They are an overview. All right? So besides the fact that people put dashboards that are for too many purposes, they also put too much information. They just need to quickly point out when something is wrong or needs action taken. But they do not need to provide all of the information necessary to take action. We have to drive people to take action, but not necessarily provide all the information to help them understand exactly what information they have to take on the first page. I keep saying on the first page because many dashboards will need multiple levels of detail. And it's very possible that one level of detail would be analytical, and seeing a problem on the analytical dashboard might drive you down to a lower level of maybe an operational level dashboard to see exactly what's happening. So to solve this idea of what do we put on the page, we turn to Schneiderman's mantra. Schneiderman, and this, we're going to say this over and over again, right? Schneiderman's mantra for analytical navigation: overview first, zoom and filter, then details on demand. The overview is that. It's just the overview. What does the overview do? It reduces search. And by that, what I mean is that we don't want somebody to have to look at all of the information on the dashboard to try to figure out what it is that they have to take action about first. The dashboard should basically, when a person opens it, it should immediately drive attention to the thing that is the most important. That for the reason this person opened this dashboard on this day, what is going on? And what does that person have to notice first? Okay, by creating an overview, the user is directed to stop looking at other spots and searching the whole dashboard for what's going on, and driven to what is important. The overview allows us to look at some overall patterns, and it's supposed to aid the user in choosing the next move. Here's my overall patterns. Here's where that pattern is bad. Go now. So we don't give them too much detail because it's supposed to be a big picture, and the eyes need to be driven to find the points of interest. How do we do that? We do it through annotation. We do it through color change. We do it through some other things that we're going to talk about next section, okay? But we start with the big picture, okay? Now the next step is zooming and filtering, right? And there's a whole lot of definition about this in the book, and I'm not gonna get into it now. And a lot of these things you're very well aware of, right? But all of these things are available in Tableau. So if I look at a thing at a particular point on the dashboard, I drill into it, I can then say add an extra variable, remove a variable, group things together, and show it again. The analytical component of Tableau is really powerful, and we're going to look at that in a couple of sessions, all right? So the idea here is that I'm going to continually revisualize as I understand the problem better, so that I can drill down to really what is the source of that problem. I see that there's a problem, for instance, in the West region. What do I do? I drill into the West region. I see that 4 of the states are doing great, 1 state is doing okay, and the 2 states are doing very, very poorly. So now I drill into those states, and I see that it's a particular city or a particular manager's area or a particular plant that's in trouble. Again, these are all kind of drill down ideas, but then I can also just group bad performing states with everybody else and see the differences along key criteria, right? So the idea is drive me to where I have to take action, then give me the ability to understand what is wrong or what is driving the need for taking action, and then get the detail as much as you want. Provide as much detail as you can when people need it. So this is the key problem, is that maybe to solve a problem, you need 15 different fields of information to understand exactly what the problem is. You don't provide that on the front page, right? Because then you're showing 15 levels of detail or 15 items of detail or dimensions of detail on every record, the ones that are doing well and the ones that are doing badly. What we want to do is provide the detail that they need when they need it. The tooltip in Tableau is a great place to put that. When you hover over, you could put 40 fields in there if you really wanted to. I show this next visualization just because it's kind of fun to look at something from back in the 90s about how people showed how to do details on demand. I just like looking at old Windows stuff and saying, boy, I remember those days. All right. It's actually yeah, it's Windows. All right. So anyway, all right. So successful dashboards are customized to the user, focus on what they display, but not the technology they use, and they are visually clear. Okay. Now, in the book, Few suggests 13 common pitfalls to dashboard design. I don't know where the number 13 came from, because I really think a whole bunch of these common pitfalls are really different instances of a particular problem. So let's kind of look through them relatively quickly. I'm not going to go through them all in deep detail because that's in the reading. But let's look at the first one. Mistake number 1 is exceeding a single screen. Again, we don't exceed a single screen because of working memory limitations. The dashboard user needs to see all of the data they need for that cognitive evaluation for which the dashboard pane is designed. If they can't see all that information, they can't create the synthesis they need to perform that cognitive evaluation. So a well-designed dashboard displays everything we need for the cognitive evaluation on the same screen. Now, fragmenting data is basically the same as number 1. And often we fragment data across multiple screens because we've wasted space by using artsy gauges and things like that. All right. We want to try to focus on using visualizations like spark lines and bullet graphs that you will look at in the hands-on to utilize those on a dashboard. So here's an example. They have a executive dashboard with a whole different bunch of panes, but look at how much information is actually being shown on this whole screen. It's 4 numbers. This whole screen is showing 4 numbers. The gauges are a problem. There's all kinds of gauge problems here. Notice here, this is one of the real problems with gauges, is that gauges often have different scales. So here's a gauge that's barely in the red. It's 1.26%. Here's a gauge that's way in the red, and it's also 1.26%. And way in the red over here is 3.98%. All right. So again, I'm going to evaluate this top gauge as a different number than the bottom gauge, even though they are the same number, simply because the gauges are pointing different directions. Right? It's another reason that gauges are a problem. And we're going to look at the alternative to gauges, which are bullet graphs, in a little while. Same thing here. We have lots of graphs with very little information. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 numbers. This isn't so bad as far as the amount of information, but we've pretty much wasted the top of this screen. So requiring the user to scroll was mistake number 3, specific case of number 1, right? Now, here's the thing, though, about scrolling that you might not have thought about. I mean, some of you who've done design do know this. But when a user sees only part of the data but not all of it, a few things happen. First, they start thinking, what am I missing? The second thing they start thinking about is they prioritize things as the things that you show them at the beginning are assumed cognitively to be more important as the things that you make them go get later. And third, of course, they forget what they saw before. So it's kind of this above the fold in a newspaper. We've always talked, and we talk about this in web design, above the fold. Above the fold means the stuff that's on the top of the front page of the paper is supposed to be the most important. The stuff on the bottom is less important. And again, we don't want them to have to synthesize. Even scrolling is the same as going to another page as far as the working memory limitations. Inadequate context. Look at these graphs. Look at these gauges, I mean. Again, are any of these numbers good or bad? How bad? How good? Everything on the dashboard must provide enough context to answer the question, this number is compared to something else, so it is good, bad, or indifferent. Okay? Gauges look cool. They're terrible space wasters. If you have to use a gauge, try to give context. This gauge has a lot of context, right? I can tell that my average call length is currently rather slow compared to my typical company average. Or so let's say this is for a particular person. Their average call length is a little longer than the company average, but it's still significantly less than the best practice for the industry. So it's not a great number. Maybe this person spends more time, and maybe we have to go get more context. If this is a one person, maybe those extra few seconds they're spending on average with a call is actually making their ratings higher, right? So this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a way to investigate certain questions. Excessive detail or precision. This hurts the idea of at a glance. Dashboard data should not be precise to 6 levels of decimal places unless there's a reason that 6 levels of decimal places matter, okay? Too much information is just as big a problem as too little. And here's just an example of too much precision, right? We've talked about this last week when we were talking about deviation. For one thing, showing indirect measures uses up more pixels. But the other thing is that you want to make sure that you're using the proper visualization for the relationship that you're trying to communicate. Don't show this, budget versus actual, if what you're really trying to discuss is deviation, okay? Sometimes you may also show the indirect measures along with this. You know, I might actually see that, a table that has both and then the actual deviation down here, but don't ask your user to calculate in their head these differences. Don't use the wrong chart. We're not going to talk about this, but take a look at this 3D pie chart. How did the use of all of this table, all of these pixels with all of this legend information and all of this forced perspective tell us anything more than a table would have, right? And again, remember, sometimes a table is the right choice. And please don't avoid using a table because you think somehow data visualization does not include tables. Use a table when tables make sense. But in this case, if you wanted to show a rank order of something, what would we use? We'd probably use a sorted bar chart. That'll help us understand the difference. This one's crazy. This one's not even in order of rank. So this one doesn't just, it also breaks the rules of pie charts in how it's created as well. So I can't possibly tell that without these numbers being here, I couldn't tell who was higher here, right? This is just a terrible pie chart. All right, meaningless variety. This is the last one I'm going to talk about because I tend to see this on dashboards a lot, which is I use a whole bunch of different visualizations, different chart types, because I don't want to seem like the only chart type I'm using is a bar graph. No, use the right chart type for the kind of relationship that you're going to show. And we've only talked about a couple of them so far. After next week, we'll talk about more, okay? And I'm going to just skip through these things, okay? So remember Tufte, if your statistics are boring, if you're trying to make them look pretty because they're boring, you've got the wrong numbers. I love his quote here, but the key thing here is if you think you have to dress up your numbers to make them interesting, go find better numbers. Go find something more interesting in your numbers. Don't make a 24 color chart to make it look cool. So I put some links in here. I actually didn't test the links. They worked the last time I did this in the spring. Some of these may have died since this, but there's plenty of resources out there online about some best practices for designing dashboards. And I highly encourage you to look around for these kinds of guidelines and best practices. So the next thing that you'll do in the next video that you should look at is the hands-on. Now, in these slides are the basic steps that are going to go on in the hands-on. Okay, so these slides will be posted. Go ahead and follow them if you need to during the hands-on, but these basically describe what's going on in the hands-on, okay? But there's something I really want to talk about before you start on the hands-on, okay? And this really has to do with something called affordances, all right? One of the key things about interactive visualizations on computers is that people think they should click things, right? And that's because the visualization affords clickability. And what do I mean by that? So affordance theory is this key theory of perception, and it explains why people interpret the way the world works the way they do. And you interact with objects' affordances constantly, because objects, whether they are digital or physical, provide hints based upon their configuration and what they look like and how they behave and how you've seen them behave before. They provide hints as to their properties. And you perceive these properties as ways to afford action. And what that means is I see a ball and I know I can grab it and throw it, unless it's my son's shot put. Then I learned that that's not a ball. That's something else. That shot put has grasp ability. It does not really have throw ability, right? But I learned that from experience, right? A hammer also has grasp ability. It also has throw ability, but it also has strike ability, right? And a chair has sit ability, right? Affordances are basically a categorization mechanism, and your experience trains you to very quickly, based upon the configuration of an object, place it into a category of what it affords. So when you see one chair, unless you're looking at some really crazy modern art chair, you don't test that as whether it's a workable chair. If you see a chair, you sit down. I guess unless you're really heavy, you sit down and assume that the chair will hold you. And digital dashboards are the same. People, when they look at a digital dashboard, kind of think it should behave a certain way, right? And the elements of a dashboard, and that means not just the different visualizations, but the components in the visualization tend to afford clickability, meaning when I see a map of the United States and I mouse over it and it highlights, I think I can click it and something will happen, right? And the concept is that if I click on one portion of that dashboard, like I click on the state of South Carolina or on Texas, all the others will respect that link. So if I click on one pane, the customer state and order panes of this example that we're going to do in the hands-on will respect that click. All right. So the reason that we talk about affordances is because people are going to approach your dashboard assuming that they can click things. And in the hands-on, you're going to go ahead and set filters to let people click things and actions to let people click in one area of the visualization and have other visualization components respect that click. Finally, I'm going to talk about two optimal visualizations for dashboards. Spark lines were actually created by Edward Tufte, and Stephen Few, your author of your textbook, developed the spec for bullet graphs. Okay, and it's kind of cool. I've actually got the links to the actual design specs for these visualizations, and it's kind of cool to go read them and understand where they're coming from as far as why things behave the way they do. But bullet graphs are a design which is meant to compare one measure against another. And so the way you want to think about this is that the line is the line that you see here, the dark line. This is actually from the spec from way back. So this is why it's kind of looks like this. But in Tableau, they look very nice. You have a nice line here, and that's your reference. So my revenue for 2005 year to date is actually exceeding whatever this target is. And this shaded area behind actually has meaning as well. Interestingly, I just noticed that this spec is actually this bullet graph. I'll have to stop using this as an example. I've just noticed that this bullet graph is violating the spec. All right, let's look at a couple other examples. Here's a good one. Here's the target for California. Here's the actual level of the variable. So the level of the variable has exceeded the target. And then this is the actual spec, is that the shading is supposed to be 60, 80, the shading changes at 60 and 80% of the target. So I know that this is the 80% target for Colorado. That's a misprint. This is the 80% target for Colorado, the 60% target for Utah. Okay. I know that because the shading is different. All right. And in the visualization, in the hands-on, you're going to build some bullet graphs. Spark lines are really just line charts, right? They're line charts, and you can do these in Excel, and you've been able to do it for a while. This is what it looks like in Excel. And the key thing that you can do with a spark line is you can say, well, here's what the number is, but what does the trend look like? So is this number good or bad according to the trend for the last 6 months? So look at these two tables, right? In this side on the left, we see all departments and we see some numbers. And we see that women's apparel is really good, and patio and garden is second, and toys is third. And then electronics is 14.9. But look how much more information we get about how are these numbers good or bad. Electronics 14.9 is the lowest it's been. Toys and women's apparel is the highest it's been. Patio and garden is coming kind of down. It's probably cyclical for the summer, etc. So one of the things that Sparklines do is help you to use a very little bit of real estate to give you a whole bunch of context about how to evaluate this number as being positive, as being a good number, or a quote unquote bad number. The key thing I want you to see about those visualizations is that they are seriously information dense. You can put, look how much information we put here. We put what was last year, what was the target, which could be last year's sales versus this year's. How are we doing against the target, but also so we're missing the target here, but we're missing the target worse in Ohio than in Oregon. We've almost made that target. You get a ton more information. And think about if you were going to show this exact same information on a bunch of dials. It would take up a ton more space, and the dials would be impossible to interpret because the dials would all be pointing different directions because their scales are all different. All right. So they allow for more insight at a glance, and they replace large graphical components on dashboards. Next time we have a lecture, we're going to talk about how do we best arrange things on dashboards? How do we use one design element to actually separate two other parts of the dashboard through the way we align things and the way that we group things. But for now, all I want you to focus on is looking at what are the types of dashboards. And when you continue to work on your group project, I want you to be focusing on, okay, so we've decided on what our question is, who is the person who's going to be approaching this dashboard, and what is the cognitive evaluation that we're trying to help them with, and how do we put the information they need there as densely as possible so that we can provide information on a single screen at a glance. And so the rest of the slides in this deck are for the hands-on on Sparklines and bullet graphs, those videos are posted on Canvas. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact me through the normal channels.